Heyo, welcome everyone to episode 90 of Today in the Scene. I can't believe we're getting up to 90. This is really exciting. But I'm Joe from Indie Arcade Wave. I just wanted to say thank you for checking us out. If you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And we're just going to keep them coming for you. We got a whole bunch more and lots of people I want to talk to. So there will be more videos coming. This week, we're going to meet with a Killer Queen fanatic, I guess we could call him. Josh Eklow has been in the Killer Queen scene for a long time. I just met him in Omaha this last weekend, and he's actually one that he was running the tournament, kind of getting things together. So I guess without further ado, here's Josh. How you doing?
Very well. Now,
Yes.
especially now that I'm recovered from the tournament weekend.
Yeah, that was a tough weekend. Super fun. Loved showing off Galactic Battleground out there and everything. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's a cool spot. I really liked the
Yeah.
arcade.
Yeah, I really the thing that it's funny because it's like the things that I appreciate about Beercade, and I usually think they might think I'm joking, is like I'll tell them like, man, these booths are great, or
They're
like,
so
oh
cool. That
wow,
was the first thing I noticed.
there's so many places to sit down here, or like, oh, these lockers. But it's like there's a lot of like little things like that like especially if you're traveling,
Yeah,
are really nice, and you notice them. Like maybe if you even if you only go there once a week, you don't really think about it. But when you're there all day or all day for several days, you really start to notice like if there's nowhere comfortable to sit down, and it's day 3 of you being in the arcade for like 8 hours at a time.
8 hours, 10 hours a day. Yeah.
It gets a little rough.
Yeah, that's
So,
funny. Funny you mentioned the lockers because Kelly actually forgot his backpack in there. We were laughing about that. I was
sure,
like,
yeah.
"How are you going to code without your backpack?"
But yeah, it's like little things like that. Like as soon as I got to Omaha and I checked out the arcade, I was like, oh, this place would be great for a tournament. Like I was joking with one of the guys that was playing pinball, my friend Victor. I was like, oh, if this was back in Chicago, you would all be mad. You'd be mad at all of us because we'd all be leaning against these pinball machines watching the tournament.
Right.
Because it's just kind of a little bit smaller back there. And it's like here in Omaha, there was plenty of place to stand around. And, they had all the TVs tuned to it. So you could be sitting at the bar and watching. And a lot of that stuff, yeah, it's like, because when people come to a tournament for Killer Queen, and I'm sure I know they're like this for like pinball and stuff like that too, but it's like they want to be kind of playing as much as possible. So it's like people got in Friday night and they were at the arcade till close on Friday night. Mm-hmm. And then Saturday night, they were at the arcade till close. And then after the tournament, people typically play till close. So it's like you end up being in the arcade for a long time. So those general comforts, kind of determine how long you get to play at the arcade comfortably and stuff like that. So, but even still, it tires you out. And I used to in the early days of Killer Queen, I would be at the arcade till close, several nights a week. But now I've kind of retired in disposition, at least, and energy levels, especially since I got used to staying at home so good. I got really good at it. So it's for me, if I stay till the arcade till late, I'm very tired after. But I'm re-energized now, ready to go back and play.
Yeah, awesome weekend. I had so much fun. It was my first tournament I actually played in, but let's jump into it. Let's introduce you. Like, let us know about who Josh is. Let us know a little bit about yourself.
So I'm originally from Chicago, although I grew up out in the suburbs, and then I ended up going to college in Iowa City, Iowa, at the University of Iowa, and I did school there in grad school, and then just lived there for a good while. And so in 2014, I was sort of feeling like I'd kind of juiced Iowa City out of everything there was to do. And at the time, I really wasn't playing many games in any sort of serious way, just because there wasn't really a venue for you to do that in Iowa City. Kind of surprisingly, it was like they had a large arcade in town right before I got there. And then they just didn't have one for almost the entire time that I was in town. And then when they finally did open an arcade, I think I had already left Iowa City, but then it was like such a small arcade that like I knew about Killer Queen, but I was like, they would not be able to fit it in this. It was a really tiny arcade. So that was kind of a new thing for me once I moved to Chicago in 2014, which ended up being sort of like the perfect time to get into Killer Queen. I showed up in Chicago in August of 2014. I didn't know anyone in town, and I knew I wanted to make some friends because otherwise I'd be very lonely. And so I decided that the best way to do that would be to get involved in some video game community. I don't know why that was my thought at the time, because I mean I've always liked games and played a lot of games online, and but I've never really been like a PC gamer. I was always sort of more. We always had a Mac, so I was a video editor instead of a gamer on the PC. But I was like, all right, I need to get good at a game, and that's how I'll meet people. And I think it was maybe like the first or second weekend that I was in town that I went to this event that they had at the Threadless headquarters in Chicago called Bit Bash, and it was like an independent games festival. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. They did it like a few more times after that, and then they did some smaller like themed versions of it. But I don't know if there's been any Bit Bashes in Chicago since then. But you would dig it. It was like a very cool event, and so it was a lot of it was kind of like the indie games festival sort of circuit. So there was like free beer and a ton of games for you to set up for you to play for like 5 minutes. And a lot of them were kind of the same game, because I find that like a lot of indie games festivals, they assume that you're only going to play for like 5 minutes. So they don't want to give you anything too deep. They want to give you something that you can like interact with the other three people that are waiting with you for like 5 minutes. So it's like a lot of Smash clones, a lot of just really simple games where like the whole novelty of the game is the controller itself, or like the how you control the character, or whatever you're doing. Those things are like, okay, that's fun for like a minute, but I'm probably not going to devote my life to it. Uh, but then I saw that there was Killer Queen there, and so I waited in line and waited in line, and then I played one game of it, and I was like, this is fun. And part of why I really liked it was because it seemed like kind of honestly really within my wheelhouse, because I grew up playing kind of older games typically than probably most of my peers. Like when everyone was cool and had a Nintendo, I was playing my uncle's hand-me-down Atari, and my favorite game was Joust, and I would just play Joust alone for hours. And then eventually I had a Nintendo when everyone else had already moved on. And then I ended up getting a PlayStation like really randomly. But like I never had good internet, and I didn't really have a lot of friends that played video games. So I kind of, my video game experience at that point was like a lot of it's like Grand Theft Auto and kind of just stuff like that. But yeah, when I played Killer Queen, I was like, this is great. One stick, one button. It's not like like I've had interest in fighting games, but like they were always too complicated for me. Sort
The
of.
learning curve is crazy.
Yeah, like since then, I've put in a lot of the time and practice and effort. Although a lot of that has kind of been inspired by people that I met playing Killer Queen. But yeah, at the time I was like I was like, this seems doable, learnable. Especially because I was thinking I was like either gonna like try to get involved in this or Smash, which just seemed like people have been masters of this for like a decade. So it's like I'm not gonna learn, I'm not gonna find any new ground here in Smash. So my first time playing beyond that like 30 seconds of playing was actually a tournament. It was Killer Queen 2. It was the second tournament in Chicago. And I know that the first tournament had happened like maybe like a month prior to that. And from what I heard, there were like 11 teams, which is pretty common when you have like a like the first big tournament in a city. I've noticed as Killer Queen has expanded beyond Chicago, especially because at that time, like when nobody knows what they're doing, the playing field is very level. It's kind of like there's no hard feelings, because literally nobody's good enough to create any hard feelings. But that second one, we had 4 teams, and my team came in third. So that was my first taste of victory. And it was fun. So it was like, there were only 20 of us at that second tournament, but after playing it for a few hours, I was like, yeah, this is really fun. And I liked the people that I had met playing. And at that point, we decided we wanted to play more often. And especially at that time, the Killer Queen in Chicago, that summer of like 2014, was kind of like the only publicly available machine that was like there on a regular basis, was anywhere. And so at the time, our biggest struggle was trying to just get 10 people actually to the machine, because especially at that time, there were no bots. So if you didn't have 10 people, you just couldn't play a full game. And so at that time, a few of the folks that had been playing for just a little bit longer than me established the Chicago Facebook group for Killer Queen. And the whole purpose of it was to just get 10 people to the machine on any given night. So somebody, most of the posts were like, hey, is anybody interested in going to the arcade on, Thursday? And if we could get 10 people to commit, we would all go and play for a few hours. And so it kind of grew from there. We kept putting on tournaments, although at that point the early ones were really kind of being put on by the arcade, and more specifically this great guy James Barron, who was also the games tech at the arcade. He was interested in the scene, so he threw the first three tournaments, maybe the fourth one too. And they kind of started to grow at that point. I think the third one had maybe like 8 or 9 teams. And then after that third tournament, we established a weekly night on Wednesdays at the arcade. And pretty much the reason we picked that was because it was like an empty night at the arcade. So we wouldn't feel like bullies for monopolizing the machine. And so we started doing every Wednesday at Logan Arcade was what we called League Night, which at first was sort of a proper league. People wanted me to keep score and like keep track of victories and losses and have a real season. And we did all that for about maybe a few months. And then at the end of the season, nobody cared. They just wanted to come play every week. So we sort of rejiggered the whole sort of format of the event to recognize that the point of the weekly night wasn't necessarily to have some competitive league, but to just sort of like play together as a community and try to grow the community. So every Wednesday, the game would be on free. That was something that pretty early on the arcade bought into, giving us a free night. And so the initial idea was that we would do a round robin, but we didn't want to ever be in a position where we'd have to tell people like, oh, sorry, you can't play tonight. It's league night. Like, I don't know if you've ever gone to a bowling alley on like a Wednesday because you randomly thought, oh, we're not doing anything. Let's go bowling. And then you show up and they tell you can't bowl because it's league night. It's very frustrating. And so, especially with something like Killer Queen, you kind of have to be evangelizing and recruiting at all times. And we started from literally not even having 10. So that was sort of like bred into us that you have to be growing at all times. And even once you get to like a comfortable size, you still kind of have to always be growing. So we didn't want to ever be in a position where somebody would see a bunch of us having fun on the machine and not get to join in the fun. So we would do a round robin, but pretty quickly I found that like nothing online that would help me to organize this would allow for just like randomly adding a team at like halfway through. It would like want to restart it and it'd be a whole thing. And so so I ended up going to like the neighborhood pharmacy and just getting a bunch of office supplies and building this poster board thing with like a bunch of hooks. And I got a bunch of binder clips and markers. And so every Wednesday I'd show up with a bunch of index cards and just people just fill out a team, and you would just move the index cards kind of up the ladder on the board. And it was so simple that everybody could operate it. So I didn't even have to be in charge of it, which I liked because sometimes I'm playing, or sometimes I'm getting a root beer, or sometimes I'm standing outside, talking with people, or all sorts of stuff. So it's like I didn't want it to be dependent on me, because it's like I also wanted to have fun. It's like a good organizer can get all their work out of the way kind of before the event and then just try to enjoy it. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But with the league in Chicago, it always kind of worked out well like that. And with other games, people don't necessarily kind of have that same mindset, because it's like if I'm playing Tekken and I am paired up with somebody, even if I'm in person, Because I've gone to like Tekken tournaments. Like if I'm playing against another person, nowhere in my head am I thinking I have to be nice to this person or they may never play this game again. Like I don't really care if if I beat somebody so bad in Tekken and they never play the game again. I don't care because Bandai Namco has a giant marketing arm whose whole purpose is to make sure that people want to play Tekken. But when you play and really care about something like Killer Queen, like I had sort of instantly fallen in love with this game and the idea of building this community because it was like this is how I'm gonna make friends. It's like I can't do that. Like you can't bully somebody on the machine and then just let them leave and never want to play again because it's like we need every Killer Queen playing soul that we could possibly get uh, at all times. So it's like you kind of always have to be like an evangelist for the game at the same time as like being a competitor at the game. Like anyone who's been playing the game for long enough has their sort of elevator pitch where they can explain the entire game to you in 30 seconds because that'll happen a lot. Like you'll be standing around the machine and some people will come over and go, "Oh, what's this?" And then you explain it to them and try your best to get them to play. And hopefully you can reel in the occasional person who is bad at something but still sees it as something that they'd like to get good at. Because not everybody's like that. Some people don't find any pleasure in being bad at something, and and Killer Queen is a win or lose game. You kind of there's not like a middle ground. You're either
Right. I
winning
mean,
or you're losing. It's
yeah.
a zero sum thing.
Right.
And
Right at
so
the end, it straight up says like victory or
yeah,
defeat. You know.
and so it's like like Logan has a lot of foot traffic. So on a Friday night, if there's like 30 of us Killer Queen nerds there, there's just as likely to be large groups of other people there just because it's a popular and cool place to hang out. And so a lot of times, like a group of 5 or a group of 10 or maybe just a few people will be like, we'll want to play. And people have to remember to be good ambassadors for the game, which people are very typically very good at. And then but realistically, you're kind of lucky if like 1 in 10 people is of that mindset where it's like, okay, I recognize that I completely suck at this now, but this is something that I could get better at, and getting better at it would be a pleasurable activity for me, which is not everybody. But the nice thing about Killer Queen, and I tell people this all the time, is that those people that do kind of join into the cult of Killer Queen are typically those growth mindset people. Like they see things as obstacles and want to get better. And so typically those people are not just good at Killer Queen. They're usually good at other things. And those things are not always just other video games. That's always been one interesting thing about Killer Queen is it attracts people outside of, sort of people who would consider themselves gamers or competitive gamers even. It pulls a lot of people that are dodgeball players or volleyball players or like people that don't even play video games, like people that play fighting games will often get interested in it. People that play retro games, but it also just will pull like musicians or mathematicians or scientists or people that develop games or writers or all sorts of stuff. So the people that do tend to fall into the scene tend to be interesting people to get to know. So it's a really good way to make friends, and it's a social thing anyway. So you're kind of forced at the very least to go and be social because with other things, I've gone to Tekken tournaments and not left feeling like I really even necessarily met anybody. But with Killer Queen, since it's a team game, you're playing at least with your team, and a big part of the joy typically is feeling the growth as a team. Like over the course of a tournament, especially if there's some sort of stage where it's like before the double elimination, like there's a group stage or whatever it is. A lot of this sort of joy is like feeling your team come together or like talking about a strategy in between games and then seeing how it works and if it works better. Or, everyone gets better individually the more they play, but your team as a cohesive unit, typically you can sort of feel it getting better over the course of even just an evening of playing rounds at League together. And so it's like a team building exercise that's more fun than what you would usually imagine for team building exercises. And so it builds these really strong communities, and that's part of what makes the game so sticky.
Yeah.
Is that like I love the game anyway. Like even just in a vacuum, I find the game pleasurable to play. But I know a lot of people who say like the reason that they still play is like 99% because that's their friend community now. That's like everyone they know plays Killer Queen. That's how they spend time with people, outside of their home, as they all go to the arcade and play the game. But the game itself is also sort of, if you think about like what the studies say about like how you actually make friends with people, it's like you have to spend like non-structured time with somebody, like 6 separate occasions for like an hour. There's some like equation where it's like, and then you'll be like friends.
Right.
And if you look at it, it's like, oh, it's very easy to accomplish if you just start going to the arcade and hanging around the Killer Queen machine. Like before you know it, you'll have friends, because even if you just go and stand there and don't say a word, somebody will talk to you. I mean, I was the kind of guy who would always want to be like talking to any face that even, would show up to play. So that's kind of why it's so sticky. And then once traveling became a thing, I mean, then it's even harder to quit because of how fun it is to travel for a tournament, which we didn't, like that wasn't a thing until probably 2015 or so. Because so like the time that I was playing in Chicago when everything first started, there was one other machine, and it was in New York at a co-working space called Waka Waka, like Pac-Man, like Waka Waka
Right,
Waka.
right,
Waka.
right.
And so it was like a co-working space for developers, and they would have they started having like a monthly Killer Queen tournament because they had a machine there. And by this time, I was already deeply a KQ nerd, but with no content to watch. So I was like, oh, sweet, I'll watch these. So I was like the only one watching them. And back in those days, Kickstarter would show up and just destroy everybody. And then after a while, that machine went away. So there were no tournaments anymore. And so New York was kind of just dark for a while. And so if there was a little while again where all of a sudden Chicago was all there was. And that was what, like, at that point, Chicago was growing because we were having, bi-monthly tournaments. We had our weekly league. There were probably like 7 or 8 regular teams worth of people that were coming out and hanging out multiple nights a week, especially like the winter of 2015 was just brutal. And a lot of us just lived at the arcade and just played Killer Queen every night, all night. And then New York woke up, actually, because they got at the NYU Game Center in Brooklyn, the original machine that Josh and Nick built themselves, they installed that there. So then there started to be a New York scene that was meeting and playing once a week. And they started having a weekly night on Fridays, which was very cool. And like right around then, Portland also started up. So Portland got a machine at Ground Control in Portland, and they started to have a weekly night and started to play. And so it was like right before New York had gone dark the first time, we were like, oh, we should go. Like, I wonder if we could beat them. Like, do you think we could beat them? Like, I wonder if we should go play them. And they went dark. And so there was no, tournament to go travel to. And then it was like, I think it was like the early summer, like June or July of 2015. And I had like just started a new job. So I was like all worried about taking off the time. But out of nowhere, Kickstarter announced on Twitter that they were having a Killer Queen tournament on like a Thursday, like a month out. So it was like, oh my God, like what? Like it's that team that, like they had this team called Death from Above that was just like really good. And we're like, oh my God. It was almost like Willy Wonka, like coming out of his factory after it had been closed all those years and then challenging you to come fight him like it was Mortal Kombat. So I was like, we have to go. So me and 4 other people from Chicago, like pretty much just like whoever could get off. Like we didn't even say like let's send our best players. Like people thought that too. They were like Logan Arcade sponsored this team to come here, and it's like no, it was literally just like which 5 of us could get the days off, And then Logan made us some t-shirts, and we bought the cheapest flights we could get on such short notice. And so we flew out there, and it was cool. It was the biggest tournament at that point that had pretty much ever happened. There were like probably like six or, over a handful of New York teams, because New York had grown their scene at that point. And then Kickstarter had like 3 teams. And I'm trying to remember if there was any other. I think that was pretty much it. And then there was us, the one Chicago team. And we ended up winning. We got knocked into losers by like the best team from New York, which was one of the NYU teams. And then we came back out of losers and won in a very close grand finals, which got reset and went to like game 14 or whatever. And so after that, we spent the weekend hanging out with the New York scene and meeting them and getting to know them. And at that point, we'd only we'd been communicating with them on Facebook, but we hadn't ever met them in person. But we just had a great weekend. And so at the end of the weekend, we were like, okay, now you guys have to come visit us. And they were like, okay. And then not even like a month later, we decided to go. We had to go to Portland because like Portland was having a tournament. And so like almost the same 5 of us, again, we're like, all right, let's do it. And so we went to Portland, and the same thing happened, got to the tournament, ran into their top team, got knocked into losers, played back to the grand finals, and then won in a very close, grand finals. And same thing. We, hung out with them for the rest of the weekend, had an amazing weekend, made a lot of friends, and said, okay, now you guys have to come visit us. And so they said, okay. And so that was when we finally had our 10th tournament in Chicago. And by then we had sort of gotten into a good sort of cadence with our tournaments, where it was like by Killer Queen, the 5th one, the community itself was running the tournaments, which was sort of a changeover, which meant that we were able to put a lot more sort of effort into them, because a lot of us were just wasting time when we should have been working, promoting a tournament instead. But, it was also a matter of kind of learning how to negotiate that with the arcade, which at the time was new. And then, we learned a lot doing that every month or every other month. And so hopefully I was able to pass some of that along to some of the newer scenes early on, especially because back in the day, as soon as like any other scene existed, I would reach out to them and start trying to get them to come visit us. And so finally for KQX, the 10th one, which was at the time like the biggest tournament ever, New York and Portland both came to Chicago. It was a big, super fun weekend in June. I think it was in June. Maybe it was like a warm October. I can't remember. Usually those are in June now. But it was, set a big precedent. And then after that, we were still sort of one of the only communities that was throwing regular tournaments. So we would have people from all over coming to our tournaments, like as soon as they would kind of light up, like Kansas City, Columbus came out to visit us really early on. Minneapolis, of course, as soon as there was a scene, people from Minneapolis were coming to Chicago, made a lot of friends with them. And it kind of helped too that a lot of those earlier scenes it was a lot in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And then the West Coast started to light up, and they all sort of were playing with each other. And Portland was hosting tournaments still, so they'd all go to Portland. And San Francisco eventually became a thing, and they were hosting a big tournament every year around GDC that people would plan, to go out to. And it's just grown. It's grown crazy since then. Although COVID definitely put a big dent in a lot of scenes. I mean, that's probably just true for like all human activity.
Just the indie arcade scene in general took a big hit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah. And I mean, luckily, there was KQ Black that popped up kind of like literally right before COVID started. So that was kind of convenient. But the arcade crowd really never made the transition over to KQ Black like I was hoping that they would. But yeah, I mean, pretty much from like 2015 until all the way up to COVID, the traveling scene just kept getting bigger. And, like as communities would get bigger, they would start hosting their like annual big tournament. And it was really at a point where you could, if you wanted to, you could be playing Killer Queen in a different city every weekend. And there were people that were like almost doing that. And there were times in my life where I was definitely hitting up probably at least a tournament a month. And there were people that live halfway across the country that I was seeing, once a month, if not more than that, just by virtue of playing Killer Queen. And so, yeah, it's hard to give up. And, it's a big part of why, when I ultimately did leave Chicago, I wasn't planning to go anywhere that didn't have Killer Queen.
That's
So,
fair. That's definitely fair.
and so Omaha got it um, a while ago, maybe like a year or two ago. They had it before COVID, and but not too long before COVID. Like their the first time that Omaha players were going to travel was down to like the last in-person tournament that happened before everybody kind of shut down. There was a tournament in Kansas City that was like the Heartland. I think that was called like the Heartland Invitational or something like that.
Okay.
But it was going to be just the Midwest, like especially the smaller, I think, newer Midwest scenes. So I think it was going to be like Omaha, St. Louis, KC. I can't remember. It was a few of the other ones. And so, but they ended up not going because it just seemed, it was like right when it was starting to get iffy. And then right after that, it shut down. So, and before COVID, there had been a pretty sizable league here. I think I want to say it was like 6 or 7 teams that were playing weekly, which is not bad. And then COVID hit, and so it's kind of funny. Like I was honestly looking forward a little bit to like retiring as far as organization goes when I moved here, but then I got here and the scene was dead. And I'm in the same place I was when I moved to Chicago, where I don't know anybody, and there's only one way I'm going to make friends, and it's over this Killer Queen machine.
Yeah, you wanted to play, so I mean, it makes perfect sense, and I'm sure you've met a ton of people. Like I was out there with you, and I met people from like Phoenix, Texas. God, I don't even. There were people from all over the place, and it was so cool to meet everybody.
It was weird too because it was an interesting. When I initially like thought, okay, we should have a tournament here where we actually try to get other people to come. I was like, okay, I'll dust off my old bag of tricks. Because in the early days, when we would have a tournament, I would like really promote it. I'd like personally message a lot of people and say, like, please come, and like we'll put you up. Like, especially in the earlier days, or even with just smaller tournaments, it was actually feasible to house everybody, like at people's houses. So it was a very like punk rock thing where it would be like, you can travel a lot if you know that all you're going to need is like a backpack with a few changes of clothes and like your bar tab for the weekend, and you find a cheap plane ticket, which Killer Queen players are really good at finding cheap flights. And it'll happen sometimes where it'll be like, there's a tournament, and then all of a sudden somebody will be like, hey, everybody, Southwest is having a sale on a flight to whatever. And it's all of a sudden you're like, I could go to that tournament. It would only cost me like $60 round trip. So it's like, yeah, I'll go, because, you get there and then you're kind of, you're going to be just playing the game all weekend. So yeah, back then it used to be a thing where, you would just crash with people and stuff like that. So I used to tell people, like, please crash with us.
It's funny you say that because while I was there, like Nick, who's in your scene, in the Chicago scene, he was like, you got a place to stay if you come to Chicago. And I met some people from Phoenix, and they were like, you can stay here.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Like, everybody I was meeting, because we came to show Galactic Battleground, obviously, and I feel like it went really well. But everybody that played and liked the game was like, yeah, if you guys ever want to come here to do a demo, like, let me know. You got a place to stay.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been part of what's been great about the scene even since the early days. Like as soon as there were, multiple scenes and stuff like that, I mean, it's like your local community becomes like really a community. Like, those people, and like you have them over, and like, if something happens, those are the people that you turn to. And like there have been some really amazing examples of that, even on like a national scale, where it was like, like somebody that was a bike courier got their bike stolen. And I think within like an afternoon, players from around the country had just kicked in to get them a new bike. And it's like stuff like that too, where it's like, the people that play this game are typically good people. So, even like you can do it. It's like not crazy to, maybe these days people wouldn't do it, but it used to be that like, if you were going to another city and you knew that they had Killer Queen, you would just pop into their Facebook group and say, hey, I'm so-and-so from, whatever city. I'm coming to your city. Do you guys want to play some games? And even if you said that, it was like more likely than not, people would try to put you up. They would take you around town, like show you, like really host you, um, because you were part of the sort of the same
Right.
family.
Part of the same community, even though you're just
Yeah.
from a different area.
And so, I mean, that's always been a great part of it. And as the community has grown, we've had to be sort of more diligent in making sure that we maintain that. But that's always been part of it. And I think a lot of it is because you have to actually spend time with these people, and you're likely going to be spending long hours with these the people in the community, and you may be sharing quarters with them. And so, like the same things that maybe will fly on. There's a saying in KQ, take it back to Xbox Live. Was I think Babel in Chicago invented that. But it's like, that attitude. It's like,
right.
Save that for the internet where you're never going to meet these people. Like these, we're all friends here. So there's been a lot of effort to make sure that we maintain that as a space, and that we're inclusive, and that we strive to make sure that everyone that can be included safely is included. And so that's part of why I love it, because even even if people are nervous, like, well, what if I'm bad? It's like, nobody cares.
Yeah, you'll
Or,
learn. We'll show you how to play.
Yeah, you can be the dorkiest dork in the universe, which I am, but if you profess your love for this game, you will be part of a welcoming family.
Yeah,
And so
I agree with that.
So for Omaha, I was like, yeah, we gotta try to get as many people as we can to come to, because I wanted to show the locals like what it's like to have like a traveling tournament experience, and because they didn't know. And
Right.
So it was great to have so many people come in. It was really funny because I really didn't expect many people to want to come here, because although I'm not from Omaha, but I live here now and I have family here, and I love it, and it's nice and quiet and beautiful and cheap and convenient, and there's good food, and there's a million reasons to come here if you have a good big reason to come here. But because otherwise it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so I really didn't expect a lot of people to like have these dreams of coming to Omaha, Nebraska. But a lot of people had family here, so that turned out to like really work in my favor, because it was like, oh, we'll visit with my aunt or my grandma or my dad, or stuff like that. And then of course some people are just crazy, like Alex Hogan from Columbus, who drove 13 hours alone to come out here and be here. But that's I've done similar things too, so I get it. But yeah, it was an amazing tournament, and it was great to have you guys there with your game. I always love when there's like other games at Killer Queen tournaments, which happens pretty frequently, because like I said, there's a lot of people in the scene that are developers. And so yeah, sometimes it's great when there's that side game going.
Yeah, that makes me think back I went to Queens Gone Wild at Fort Lauderdale, and Glitch Bar in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah.
And I ran into Omar again, who's from North Carolina, I believe.
Yeah, crab volleyball.
Yep, that game is so much fun. I can't wait for it to like come out. He put it in a cabinet finally.
Yep.
I told him I've been bugging him for so long to come on here and talk about it, but I played that. This is the first time I'd ever seen it, and I won the tournament in Florida, and I was like, I love this game. Like, you need to put this in a cabinet so that more people can play it. But it's the same story with like Tony from Deathball.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously,
yeah, exactly.
He was part of the KQ community.
Mm-hmm.
He brought it out to KQ tournaments, and people loved it. So
yeah,
we figured that's a great way to show off Galactic Battleground. It's already been to we went to Bumble Bash 4, and that was the coolest to me because all the indies were there. Like there were 7 of us. So
yeah, I missed Bumble Bash 4. Unfortunately, it was that ended up being really bad luck. I spent like all of 2019 not traveling, because I got married at the end of 2019. So I was like, I'll be a good boy this year, and I won't travel, and I'll save up my energy and money. And then 2020, then I'll go all
the
out.
year.
So I missed Bumble Bash 4, but I heard it was great in Chattanooga.
Yeah. Yep. What do you think of the other indie games? Like, which ones really stand out to you, and why do you think that there's promise for them in the future, kind of like Killer Queen?
I think Teams is really nice. It's funny because, like, on the one hand, like having a team game, like there's a certain it puts a little more pressure on the game, because then you have some requirement of having more than 2 players. And and that can make like matchmaking. And when I say matchmaking, like in like getting 10 people to the cab at the arcade is just real life matchmaking. Um, so it can make it harder. But there's something about teams that sort of like makes you also be building those friendships that makes the game very sticky. But I think part of it too is that a lot of indie games tend to be designed sort of like with that like Othello mindset, where it's like it takes a minute to learn, but a lifetime to master. And like I said, a lot of the indie games that like I'm really into, or people that I know are really into, like that's a lot of the process. It's like they like the feeling of getting good and getting better at the game, and this whole idea where it's like, you know, in like role playing games or these like big AAA titles that you might play in your console, you spend all this time, the only thing that levels up is your character. But if you're playing a lot of these indie games, the thing that levels up is you. And you know, when you can go kind of be doing that with other people, and then also showing that off to other people, you know, partially, but also just like sharing in that process with other people, that makes it really sticky. So I think teams is even though I tend to myself kind of think that I enjoy single player games more, I think team games are really good for that. And a lot of indie games kind of incorporate that, especially ones that are kind of looking at sort of like a more sportsy side of what gaming could be. Um, I think that too, I think is also, there's something to that, because it's like, you know, basketball never ends, you know, just they just keep playing it every season. And so, you know, if a game is like that, then, you know, like it doesn't matter that your game's been out for 10 years if people are still playing it and still getting good and still refining the strategy and the metagame and all that. But I think, you know, I think too, like the more that indie games are out in public, which I, you know, is something that like, I mean, the show is Indie Arcade Wave, right? And like, you know, Josh and Nick, the guys that make Killer Queen, will talk all the time about indie arcade, which is kind of a newish thing. Um, but I think that that's part of, you know, why a lot of people are interested in it, is because it's in person. It's outside. You're, you know, you're leaving the house. You're going to, you know, kind of that third space, a public space, you know, that's not work and that's not your home. And so you're being out in public and engaging in some, you know, activity that's more than just passively watching a movie or playing a game. And nowadays, sometimes playing games feels like you're watching a movie. So I think that's a big part of it. But I also kind of like when they're, I mean, I guess I sort of said this, but when they're kind of simple. So it feels like there's like not a huge learning curve, but there does need to be something.
Right.
Like it can't be a total complete baby game, or else it feels like you're not doing anything. And so
Right.
like a lot of my favorite indie games are things like that, or where it's like Nidhogg was something that I remember I first played on like the indie sort of festival circuit, and I was so stoked when it was going to come to PlayStation, and then it was like literally I was the only one playing it. I could like never find another person to play it with. Um, and I think that's kind of still seems true for the second one too. Or like
How cool would that be in a cabinet?
they do have that in a cabinet in Chicago at one of the arcades. It was Emporium, had this cabinet that was called the, I want to say it was called the Indie City cabinet, but and I think it had multiple games in it. I think maybe it was supposed to rotate, but I only ever remember it having Nidhogg, which was interesting because then it meant I was playing Nidhogg with a arcade stick instead of a controller. But it was cool. I mean, like, yeah, I would love to see more games like that. Just like, you know, in the arcade, especially because, you know, it's deceptively simple, but it actually has a lot of skill to it. Whereas like if I step up to a fighting game that I don't know, I already go in feeling like, I don't know this.
You're gonna spend so much time
I'm
just
gonna
learning like
lose.
the basic combos.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
your point, like the easy to play, hard to master is kind of what all the indie guys like. That's the goal of the game is you can walk up to Galactic Battleground, Death Ball, Switch and Shoot, any of these games,
yeah,
and like you can play, you can figure it out.
right,
But to be the best and like to be really competitive when it comes to like playing a 4-player, 2-player game, whatever it may
right,
be, like you need to put in time to learn the little intricacies of like your
right.
controls and learn your limits, things like that.
And that's what's actually nice about like having 5 people in Killer Queen, even more than 4. Like 4 is already getting there, but like
Right.
if it's a 1v1 game and you lose, you
It's on
lost.
you. Yeah.
It's on you, which means there's less concern about disappointing others because some people have that too. But it's like you can't really deflect, those hard feelings if you're going to have any. And sometimes the game is just very quick
Right.
because you're
You're
just
just not
losing.
as good.
You're
Yeah.
losing very quickly. But with Killer Queen, like, and I think this is true with Killer Queen Black, even though it's 4v4, so it's
Right.
slightly less. But like in a 5v5 game, if you're not playing the best, a lot of times no one will even notice.
Right.
You know,
You
and
will, but not everybody else.
you'll notice maybe. And it's like, realistically, you're probably not going to lose unless you're the queen. You're probably not going to like single-handedly lose the
Yep.
game for your team. So even though people are still, sort of nervous sometimes to like jump on and just play a completely stakes-free, game with you, I try to tell people like, listen, you're automatically going to be better than nobody.
Right.
You're better than a bot. So just like join us, and you can only help.
Yeah. Just ask questions. Like
Exactly.
we'll tell you.
And
We'll help.
yeah, and when I first started playing, I was like, okay, I'm not. I just didn't feel like I was inherently good enough to like queen or do stuff like that. But I was like, well, but I could be a worker, and
Right.
if I just try my hardest at that, I'll be contributing. And so, then it got to be, was like, well, I wonder if I can do this good enough to like actually win the game or like have an effect on the game or like, kind of everything that's going on. And, you know, before you know it, it's like you feel like you're actually kind of playing. But if like you lose your guy for 30 seconds and forget what you're wearing, it's okay. Like no,
Yeah.
like no, probably nobody will even notice.
I lost myself a couple times in that tournament.
Yeah,
It was pretty funny.
yeah. So I mean, that's what's nice about having sort of a team is that the overall um, sort of anxiety, I guess, maybe is distributed. But it's funny. I mean, people will be very concerned, like I don't want to ruin your game or I don't want to lose for you guys, and I get it, but
Just come in and play. Just come in and play. That's all we want.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you gave us a really good recap of like how the scene developed in Chicago and everything, and let us know about kind of how it is, why you do it, running tournaments, moving to different cities, and getting everything going, stuff like that. And I really appreciate you coming on and just kind of chatting about that stuff. So I guess who do you want to shout out? Like shout out some people,
Oh my
give some
god.
social media links before we wrap everything up.
I want to shout out. I could shout out everybody.
Do it.
For everyone that's listening to this, if you're in a city of any size, find out if there's a Killer Queen in your city. If not, find out if there's an arcade in your city, and ask them why they don't have Killer Queen. Or at least maybe just even find out where it is near you if you want to watch it. If you want to know more about the game before you jump in, there's some really great stuff on YouTube. Everyone puts their tournaments there. There's a really great thing called Flight School. There's a few really great videos that'll just give you like a 5 to 10 minute overall, just sort of like here's how the game works. In general, there's some great videos on there that'll just give you like a flavor for like what the scene is like. They've done a few of those on Chicago and other communities. Like once in a while, the news will notice Killer Queen and run like the typical kind of, hey, Killer Queen is a thing that exists story. Which even this weekend in Omaha, they came out to our tournament and did one of those. So hopefully that'll pick up some Omaha players. So shout out to all of the communities and the organizers. Of course, shout out to Josh and Nick, the creators of the game, because without you guys, there would not be this whole community, and it's thousands of people at this point. So it's like it's a thing. I mean, even just beyond all the friends, there have been marriages. There are actually now human babies that wouldn't exist without this game. So it's a big deal, and it's been a big part of my life for sure, but I know a lot of people's lives for almost a decade. So so definitely big shout out to those guys for making the game in the first place. Shout out to Charles in New York for prodding them to make it into a cab. Like you were saying, you were telling Amar, sometimes people need a little prod to make it into a cab. Um, Shout out to everyone that came out to Omaha this weekend. That was really, and shout out to you guys for bringing your game to the arcade. That was really good. I'm trying to think of what the next major tournament that's happening. There's going to be one in Chicago on June 26th, KQ34. So if you're anywhere near Chicago, you should think about going to that at Logan Arcade. It's always a lot of fun. So shout out to everyone at Logan Arcade and Zesby, of course, and Melissa and everybody else there. I miss you guys. And then I think after that, the next two big tournaments that we know of for 2022 are the Queen City Crusade in Cincinnati, July 30th. That should be a really big and exciting one if you're in that neck of the woods. And then if you're on the West Coast in August, there's going to be the Seattle tournament, Emerald City Classic, which should be a huge tournament. They have a great scene too. So if you're in any of those cities, or if you're interested in traveling for Killer Queen in 2022, you should check those out. And if you just want more information about Killer Queen in general, look on Facebook. There's a lot of Facebook groups, but there's also a Killer Queen Discord. And I'm trying to think of what the best way to recommend people find that would be.
I can put the link in the description.
Perfect.
So
that'll be
that.
Perfect. So yeah, so shout outs to all the mods of the Discord. And yeah.
Awesome.
Shout out to you, man. And to everyone who's promoting indie games and indie arcade games, I should specify. And yeah, I want to play your game more. I saw that you guys had I think I saw a video somewhere of like a league or tournaments.
We ran about we were in two locations we were running tournaments in, and probably about 25 or 30 of them. And then we ran some like when I was down at Bumble Bash 4, we ran a tournament, and then we also ran one at Queens Gone Wild 2020.
Okay.
So we usually run them when we go. We were just showing off a new prototype this time. Yeah. We didn't want to like flood the tournament scene. So
well, I would definitely come out for if you guys have a big one. I'll be there. Do you guys there's no date or anything announced for it, but are you guys thinking about showing up to Bumble Bash 5 when it happens?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes. That's like we were already planning on doing this year, and then everything already scheduled. So that is definitely one we're planning on. And I guess I'm just going to say thank you, Josh. Thank you for all the shout outs. Thanks for letting people know about the scene and kind of walking us through the whole history of like how it came up in Chicago and everything started popping up. It was a really cool story to hear. And for anyone that's still watching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We really appreciate it. It'll just help us keep bringing more videos, help us grow, help us tell the stories of games like this. And until next time, peace.
Peace. I'll see you at BB5, Joe.
See you then.